The Ashworth Grand had once been a sanctuary of luxury, the pride of its coastal town. Its towering facade, adorned with ornate stonework and glistening windows, had drawn travelers from around the globe. But time and mismanagement had eroded its grandeur. Once the crown jewel of Andrew Hartley's family, the hotel now stood as a painful reminder of his failure. Andrew lingered in the desolate lobby, the air thick with dust and regret. The marble floors, dulled by years of neglect, no longer echoed with the laughter of guests. The chandeliers, once dazzling with crystalline brilliance, hung like ghosts of their former glory. The realization that he had lost his family's legacy weighed on him like an anchor. He was alone in the cavernous space when he heard the soft click of the lobby's front door. Turning, he saw a woman cautiously entering, her eyes scanning the empty reception area. She was young, maybe in her early 30s, with a small child in tow. The girl, no more than 5, clung to her hand, her gaze wide with curiosity. "I'm sorry," the woman said, her voice hesitant. "I didn't know the hotel was closed." Andrew sighed. "It is. Can I help you?" We don't have anywhere else to go," she said. Her words tumbled out as she gripped her daughter's hand tighter. I thought we could find a place to rest here for a while." Andrew studied her, his instincts warring with his compassion. She was clearly struggling. Her clothes were clean but worn, and her daughter's shoes looked as though they'd been patched more than once. His logical side told him to turn her away. He didn't have the resources to help anyone, not when he could barely help himself. But something in her eyes stopped him. "Wait here," he said, walking behind the reception desk. He retrieved an old set of keys, their tags worn smooth with age. "Room 312. It's not much, but the bed's clean." The woman's face softened in relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "Don't thank me," Andrew said, his voice gruff. "Just don't draw attention to yourselves. I'm selling the place, and I can't afford any trouble." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes as she took the keys. "I promise we'll stay out of sight." Andrew watched them disappear up the grand staircase. He told himself it was just a temporary kindness, something to ease his conscience as he prepared to leave the Ashworth behind. Over the next few days, he saw little of them. He spent his time in meetings with lawyers and potential buyers, trying to finalize the hotel sale. The decision to sell had been painful, but the debts were insurmountable, and there was no salvaging the business. The night before he left town, Andrew passed by the 3rd floor on his way to the boiler room. He heard faint laughter and paused. Peering around the corner, he saw the little girl playing with a ragged stuffed animal in the hallway while her mother folded laundry in their room. The scene was startling in its simplicity, a moment of normalcy in a place that had been anything but. When the time came to leave, Andrew didn't say goodbye. He couldn't. It was easier to leave without acknowledging the lives he'd briefly intersected with. He spent the next month in a flurry of meetings and legal negotiations, the weight of his failure gnawing at him. The Ashworth Grand was just a building, he told himself, a structure of stone and steel. Yet it was tied to memories, to his identity, to everything his family had built. When the sale was finally ready to close, Andrew returned to the hotel to meet the buyers for a final inspection. He expected to find it in the same state of disrepair he had left it in, a hollow shell of its former self. Instead, what he found left him speechless. Andrew stood frozen at the entrance to the Ashworth Grand, his hand resting on the worn brass handle. Something was different. The air outside carried a faint scent of lavender, and fresh flower baskets adorned the entrance. The once faded welcome mat had been replaced with a clean, inviting one. Pushing the door open, he stepped into a lobby that was nothing like the abandoned shell he'd left behind. The floors, though still aged, gleamed as if they had been freshly polished. The chandeliers, which he had long since written off as dusty relics, sparkled under soft, warm lighting. A distant sound of humming reached his ears, accompanied by the faint clatter of cleaning supplies. Andrew blinked, trying to reconcile the scene before him with the ghostly silence he had left behind a month ago. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing slightly. The humming stopped. From behind the reception desk, Claire emerged, her sleeves rolled up and a duster in her hand. She froze when she saw him, her cheeks flushing with surprise. "You're back," she said, setting the duster aside. What's going on here?" Andrew asked, gesturing around the lobby. "What have you done?" Claire wrung her hands, her expression nervous. I thought I could help," she said quickly. "The hotel. It was so beautiful, even in its state. I couldn't stand to see it falling apart." Andrew stared at her, his mind racing. "This isn't just cleaning," he said, his tone sharper than he intended. "You've been restoring it?" Claire nodded. "A little at a time. I used the supplies from the maintenance closet and found things tucked away in storage, linens, paint, polish. I didn't mean to overstep." Andrew ran a hand through his hair, pacing as he processed her words. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice softer. "Why would you do all this?" Claire hesitated, then met his gaze. "Because it felt like this place deserved it. And honestly, so did you." The awkward silence that followed was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Emma appeared at the top of the grand staircase, clutching her stuffed animal. "Mommy, who's that?" she asked, her voice curious. "That's Mr. Hartley," Claire said gently. Emma tilted her head, looking at Andrew with wide eyes. "Is this your castle?" Andrew smiled despite himself. "Something like that." Emma giggled. "It's pretty." Claire offered to show Andrew the work she had done throughout the hotel. Reluctantly, he agreed, though he struggled to hide his skepticism. As they moved through the halls, he couldn't deny the transformation. The faded wallpaper in the dining hall had been stripped, revealing original wood paneling that gleamed with polish. The dusty ballroom floor had been cleaned and waxed, and the tarnished mirrors on the walls now reflected the room's grandeur. "What about the utilities?" Andrew asked, frowning. "Surely, the water and power would have run out by now." "I found a few unpaid invoices in the office," Claire admitted. "I used my savings to cover them for another month." "You paid the hotel's bills?" Andrew asked incredulously. Claire shrugged. "It seemed like the least I could do, considering you let us stay here." By the time the tour ended, Andrew was struggling to process his emotions. The Ashworth Grand looked alive again, albeit far from its former glory. Claire had done more in a month than he had managed in years. That evening, as Claire put Emma to bed, Andrew sat in the library, nursing a glass of whiskey. He stared at the room's crackling fireplace, his thoughts churning. Claire's efforts were undeniably impressive, but they had complicated an already difficult situation. He was still deep in thought when Claire entered the room, her steps hesitant. "I know I overstepped," she said quietly. "And if you want us to leave, I understand." Andrew shook his head. "I don't want you to leave, but this doesn't change the fact that the hotel is for sale." Claire's expression fell. "I know," she said. I thought maybe if the hotel looked better, you'd find a buyer who would appreciate it." Andrew sighed, rubbing his temples. "You don't understand. It's not just about the building. The debts, the liabilities, it's all too much." Claire sat down across from him. "But isn't it worth trying? This place has history, charm. People love stories like that. Maybe you just need to see it differently." Her words struck a chord, but Andrew wasn't ready to admit it. Instead, he nodded curtly. "We'll see." Over the next few days, Andrew observed Claire and Emma as they continued their efforts. Emma's laughter echoed through the halls, while Claire's determination brought life to the neglected spaces. Slowly, Andrew found himself drawn into their world. One afternoon, as he watched Claire repaint the trim of the front desk, he finally broke his silence. "You're right," he said. Claire paused, turning to him in surprise. "About what?" "About the Ashworth," Andrew said. "It's worth trying." Claire smiled, her eyes bright with hope. "So, what happens next?" Andrew glanced around the lobby, his resolve hardening. "We make it ready. For a future, whatever that might look like." Little did they know, their efforts would set off a chain of events that neither could have anticipated, transforming not only the Ashworth but their lives as well. The transformation of the Ashworth Grand became a joint effort. Andrew, though hesitant at first, found himself pulled into Claire's vision. With her determination leading the way, he began to see the hotel not as a burden, but as a canvas, a chance to rebuild not just a business, but a legacy. Morning sunlight spilled through the grand lobby's windows as the trio, Andrew, Claire, and even young Emma, worked together. Andrew tackled repairs, using tools that hadn't seen the light of day in years. Claire cleaned, painted, and polished every surface she could reach, while Emma declared herself the official decorator, her touch evident in the colorful paper flowers she taped to walls and doors. One afternoon, Andrew stood back, wiping sweat from his brow, as he surveyed their progress. The Ashworth Grand wasn't perfect, but it was alive again. During a break, Andrew sat on the steps of the grand staircase, sharing a rare moment of laughter with Claire. Emma was darting around the lobby, her giggles echoing through the space. "I have to admit," Andrew said, watching the girl, "when I first let you stay here, I didn't expect this." Claire smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "Honestly, neither did I." Andrew hesitated, then asked, "What's your story, Claire? Why were you on the streets?" Claire's smile faltered. She looked down at her hands, the weight of her past evident in her expression. "It's not a story I tell often," she said quietly. "You don't have to," Andrew said quickly. "No," Claire said, shaking her head. "You deserve to know." She took a deep breath. "Emma's father left us when she was a baby. For a while I managed to get by, working odd jobs, staying in shelters. But when the economy turned, I lost what little I had. I tried to keep things together for Emma's sake, but I failed." Andrew listened in silence, his chest tightening at the pain in her voice. "I was desperate," Claire continued. "When I saw the Ashworth, it felt like a last chance. I didn't know what I was hoping for, but I'm glad I walked in." Andrew nodded, his respect for her growing with each word. A week later, the trio's efforts began to bear fruit. The hotel was far from ready for guests, but word of the Ashworth's revival had spread through the town. Curious passers-by stopped to peek through the windows, and a few even ventured inside. One afternoon, an elderly couple entered the lobby, their eyes alight with nostalgia. "This place," the woman said, her voice trembling. "We spent our honeymoon here 40 years ago." Andrew and Claire exchanged surprised glances as the couple began recounting their memories of elegant dinners, moonlit dances, and the magic of the Ashworth Grand in its prime. Their story struck a chord with Andrew. For the first time, he began to see the Ashworth not just as a failing business, but as a part of people's lives, a place where memories were made. The unexpected attention gave Claire an idea. That evening, as she and Andrew worked in the library, she broached the subject. "I think we should host an event," she said. Andrew looked up from the stack of financial reports in front of him. "An event? Claire, we're not exactly ready to reopen." "Not a full reopening," Claire clarified. "Something small to remind people of what this place used to be, and what it could be again." Andrew frowned. "And how do you suggest we pay for this?" "We don't need much," Claire said. "We can use what we have. And if we invite the right people, people with connections, it could lead to something bigger." Andrew leaned back in his chair, considering her proposal. He had spent months drowning in numbers, trying to salvage what he could from the Ashworth's decline. But Claire's idea was different. It was risky, yes, but it was also bold, and boldness was what the Ashworth needed. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do it." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Claire took the lead, coordinating every detail of the event. She crafted invitations by hand, scoured the storage rooms for decor, and even enlisted a few locals to help with catering. Andrew handled logistics, making sure the hotel was safe and functional for guests. The night of the event arrived faster than they expected. The Ashworth's grand ballroom, though far from its original splendor, was filled with soft light and the sound of live music. Guests trickled in, their faces lighting up with recognition and wonder. Andrew stood at the edge of the room, watching as people danced, laughed, and shared stories of the Ashworth's past. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope. Claire approached him, her eyes bright, Look at them, she said. This is what the Ashworth is meant to be. Andrew nodded. You were right, he admitted. This place still has life in it. As the night went on, Andrew found himself surrounded by people eager to share their memories of the Ashworth. Among them was a man in his 60s, dressed in an impeccable suit. I'm impressed by what you've done here, the man said, shaking Andrew's hand. If you're looking for investors, I'd like to discuss some possibilities. Andrew's heart skipped a beat. I'd be happy to. As the last guests departed and the music faded, Claire and Andrew stood together in the empty ballroom. We did it, Claire said, her voice filled with pride. Andrew looked at her, a rare smile crossing his face. No, he said. You did it. Claire laughed. We make a good team. Little did they know, their journey was just beginning. The success of the event would set in motion a series of changes that would test their resolve and reshape their lives forever. The buzz from the Ashworth Grand's revival event rippled through the town like a tide of nostalgia. Stories about the hotel's transformation and the magical evening began appearing in local newspapers and on social media. Pictures of the softly lit ballroom and smiling guests gave the once-forgotten Ashworth a second life, at least in the hearts of the community. Andrew read through the articles with a mixture of pride and disbelief. For the first time in years, the Ashworth wasn't a symbol of failure. It was a beacon of possibility. The day after the event, Andrew called a meeting with Claire in the dining hall. She arrived to find him sitting at a table scattered with papers, financial statements, investor inquiries, and proposals. Looks like someone's been busy, Claire said, sitting across from him. Andrew nodded, gesturing to the papers. That event did more than bring people together. I've had 3 potential investors reach out since last night. They want to see if the Ashworth has what it takes to come back. Claire's eyes widened. That's incredible, Andrew. He leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. It is, but it's also overwhelming. This could be the chance we've been waiting for, but I'm not sure I can do it alone. Claire tilted her head. You don't have to. I'm here. Andrew hesitated, then nodded. Good. Because if this is going to work, we need to be all in. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Andrew worked tirelessly to meet with potential investors, touring them through the hotel and presenting his vision for its future. Claire, meanwhile, focused on keeping the Ashworth operational. She took charge of organizing small events, from tea parties to art exhibits, to keep the community engaged. With every passing day, the hotel grew more vibrant. Emma, ever the curious helper, became a familiar sight around the Ashworth. Guests often commented on her cheerful energy, and more than once, she charmed visitors into leaving bigger tips than they'd planned. She's got a talent, Andrew remarked one afternoon as he watched Emma lead a couple on an impromptu tour. Claire laughed. She's a natural. Maybe she'll take over the hotel one day. Andrew's smile faltered slightly, but he said nothing. The thought of a future for the Ashworth was one he had dared not entertain for years. One evening, after a particularly long day, Andrew and Claire found themselves in the gazebo, watching the sunset over the hotel grounds. I can't believe how far we've come, Claire said, her voice filled with awe. Andrew nodded. It's been a long road, but we're not there yet. What's holding you back? Claire asked gently. Andrew stared at the horizon, his jaw tightening. It's not just the hotel. It's everything. The debt, the pressure, the feeling that I've let everyone down. You haven't let anyone down, Claire said, her voice firm. Look at what you've done. You gave Emma and me a home when we had nothing. You gave this hotel a second chance. That's not failure, Andrew. That's courage. Her words struck a chord, and for a moment, Andrew let himself believe them. Despite the progress, challenges remained. The hotel still needed significant repairs, and the money from small events wasn't enough to cover the mounting costs. One day, while going through old files, Claire stumbled upon a faded blueprint of the Ashworth Grand. It included a detailed layout of the hotel, along with notes about a hidden wine cellar beneath the east wing. Curious, she showed it to Andrew. I've never seen this before, he said, examining the blueprint. Do you think it's still there? Claire asked. Andrew shrugged. Only one way to find out. Armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, they ventured into the basement, navigating through cobwebs and forgotten storage rooms. At the far end of a narrow corridor, they found a door concealed behind a stack of old crates. Andrew pried it open, revealing a staircase leading down into the darkness. "This feels like something out of a movie," Claire whispered, her excitement tempered by caution. As they descended, the air grew cooler, and the faint scent of aged wood and wine filled their noses. When they reached the bottom, they found themselves in a sprawling wine cellar, its shelves lined with dusty bottles. "Unbelievable," Andrew said, running his fingers over the labels. "Some of these must be decades old." Claire picked up a bottle, squinting at the label. "Do you think they're worth anything?" Andrew's eyes lit up. "If they've been preserved well, they could be worth a fortune." The discovery of the wine cellar proved to be a turning point. Andrew contacted a wine appraiser, who confirmed that many of the bottles were rare vintages worth significant amounts of money. The sale of the wine brought in enough funds to cover the hotel's most urgent repairs and allowed Andrew to make a serious pitch to his investors. As the Ashworth Grand began to rise from the ashes, so did Andrew's confidence. For the first time in years, he felt like he was moving forward instead of simply treading water. But amidst the excitement, a new challenge emerged, one that would test the fragile partnership between Andrew and Claire and force them to confront the question of what the Ashworth truly meant to them. The transformation of the Ashworth Grand was nearing a tipping point. The funds from the wine cellar had been a lifeline, allowing Andrew to address critical repairs and reinvigorate the hotel's appearance. Investors were beginning to take him seriously, and the once desolate halls were now filled with the hum of activity. But with progress came new challenges, and tensions between Andrew and Claire began to surface. Their shared goal of saving the hotel was undeniable, but their approaches were often at odds. It started with a disagreement over priorities. "We need to focus on the ballroom," Andrew argued one evening as they reviewed their plans. "That's where we'll host events. Bring in the big money." Claire shook her head. "The rooms should come first. Guests need a place to stay if we're going to make this a functioning hotel again." "The ballroom is the heart of the Ashworth," Andrew insisted. "And the rooms are its backbone," Claire countered. The debate grew heated, neither willing to back down. "Why don't you trust my judgment?" Andrew finally snapped. Claire's eyes widened in disbelief. "Trust your judgment? Andrew, I've been the one holding this place together while you were ready to sell it." Her words hit harder than she intended, and the room fell into a tense silence. In the days that followed, their interactions became strained. Andrew buried himself in logistical tasks, while Claire focused on small details, avoiding prolonged conversations. Emma, sensing the tension, tried to lighten the mood with her usual cheer, but even her efforts couldn't bridge the growing divide. The strain reached its peak during a meeting with one of the investors. Andrew had arranged a tour of the hotel to showcase their progress, but Claire disagreed with his approach. "They're not going to be impressed by half-finished renovations," she warned. "They'll be impressed by vision," Andrew retorted. The investor's visit was polite but unremarkable, leaving Andrew frustrated and Claire quietly vindicated. One evening, as Andrew sat alone in the library, he found himself revisiting his grandfather's journals. The entries, filled with reflections on the hotel's glory days, struck a chord. The Ashworth was never about profit. It was about people. Guests who felt at home, staff who felt like family, and a community that believed in its magic. Andrew closed the journal, his heart heavy with guilt. He had been so focused on proving himself to investors that he had lost sight of the Ashworth's essence. The next morning, Andrew found Claire in the dining hall, scrubbing the floor. "Claire," he said, his tone softer than it had been in days. She looked up, her expression guarded. "What is it?" "I was wrong," Andrew admitted. "I've been so caught up in making the investors happy that I forgot what this place is really about." Claire set down her brush, studying him carefully. "And what's that?" Andrew gestured around the room. "It's about people. The guests, the memories, the stories. That's what made the Ashworth special. And that's what will save it." Claire's expression softened. I've been trying to tell you that. I know, Andrew said, and I should have listened. With their partnership mended, Andrew and Claire decided to host another event, a community open house to showcase the Ashworths' progress and invite local feedback. The event was a resounding success. Families toured the hotel, sharing memories of past visits and marveling at its restoration. Local artists displayed their work in the ballroom, and a small band played cheerful tunes that echoed through the halls. Andrew stood at the edge of the room, watching as guests mingled and laughed. Claire joined him, a content smile on her face. You did this, Andrew said. We did this, Claire corrected. As the evening wound down, a man approached Andrew. He was in his 40s, dressed in a tailored suit, and exuded an air of quiet confidence. Mr. Hartley, the man said, extending a hand. My name is Daniel Prescott. I'm a developer with a deep appreciation for historic properties. I think we might be able to help each other. Andrew shook his hand, intrigued. What do you have in mind? Daniel smiled. Let's talk about your vision for the Ashworth, and how we can make it a reality. The meeting with Daniel Prescott marked a turning point. Unlike the other investors Andrew had encountered, Daniel wasn't interested in buying the Ashworth outright. Instead, he proposed a partnership, combining Andrew's stewardship of the hotel's legacy with his own resources and expertise in development. Andrew brought the idea to Claire, whose initial skepticism gave way to cautious optimism. It sounds promising, she said, but only if it stays true to the Ashworth's history. Andrew nodded. It will. I won't let it become anything less. As plans for the partnership began to take shape, Andrew and Claire found themselves dreaming of the future. They imagined a revitalized Ashworth, bustling with guests and events, its reputation restored to its former glory. But as the pieces fell into place, an unexpected revelation threatened to disrupt everything they had built. In the depths of the Ashworth's archives, Claire stumbled upon a box of forgotten documents. Among them was an old deed with a name she didn't recognize, and a clause that suggested the Ashworth's ownership was more complicated than anyone realized. The truth, once uncovered, would force Andrew and Claire to confront their pasts and question their roles in the Ashworth's future. The revelation from the old deed set off a chain of events neither Andrew nor Claire could have anticipated. They gathered in the library, the dim light of the antique lamps casting long shadows over the room. Claire spread the papers across the table, her brow furrowed with concern. This can't be right, Andrew said, leaning over the document. His fingers traced the faded text, stopping at a section written in archaic legalese. It's right here, Claire said, her voice steady. The deed lists a secondary claimant, a trust under the name of Evelyn Hawthorne. Andrew straightened, his jaw tightening. Evelyn Hawthorne? That's impossible. She was my great-grandfather's business partner, but she disappeared decades ago. Claire pointed to a clause at the bottom of the document. The trust stipulates that if the Ashworth is ever sold, a percentage of the proceeds must go to her heirs. Without their consent, the sale can't legally proceed. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, his frustration mounting. Why didn't anyone catch this before? Probably because no one thought the Ashworth would ever be in a position to sell, Claire said. The discovery threw a wrench into the partnership negotiations with Daniel Prescott. Without the heirs' consent, any deal would be invalid, leaving the Ashworth in limbo. Andrew and Claire had no choice but to track down the Hawthorne family. After days of research, they uncovered a lead. A woman named Margaret Hawthorne, Evelyn's granddaughter, living in a small town 2 hours away. The journey to Margaret's home was tense. Andrew drove in silence, his mind racing with questions. What if Margaret refused to cooperate? What if this was the end of the Ashworth? Claire, sensing his turmoil, broke the silence. We'll figure this out, Andrew. We always do. He glanced at her, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to his inner turmoil. What if it's too late? It's never too late to do the right thing, Claire said firmly. Margaret's home was modest but well-kept, nestled at the edge of a quiet neighborhood. She greeted them with a mixture of curiosity and caution, her gray hair pulled back into a neat bun. Mr. Hartley, she said, shaking Andrew's hand. I've heard of the Ashworth, but I never thought it would lead someone to my door. Andrew explained the situation, laying out the details of the trust and the hotel's precarious position. Margaret listened intently, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair, her hands clasped in her lap. My grandmother spoke of the Ashworth often, she said. She always said it was more than a hotel. It was a place where people found hope. If I agree to this, will you honor that legacy? Andrew exchanged a glance with Claire before answering. Yes, that's all we've been trying to do. Margaret nodded slowly. Then I'll sign. With Margaret's consent secured, the partnership with Daniel Prescott moved forward. The Ashworth Grand was no longer just a struggling hotel. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to what could be achieved when people came together. The restoration process accelerated, with Daniel's resources and expertise breathing new life into the project. The rooms were refurbished, the gardens revitalized, and the Ashworth story became a local sensation. On the day of the grand reopening, the hotel was unrecognizable. The chandeliers sparkled like they had decades ago. The ballroom was filled with music and laughter, and the once faded walls gleamed with fresh paint. Andrew stood at the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. Claire appeared at his side, her smile radiant. Can you believe we did it? She asked. Andrew looked around, his heart swelling with pride. We didn't just save the Ashworth, he said. We brought it back to life. As the night went on, Andrew found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The Ashworth was more than a building. It was a home, a place where people found not just shelter, but connection. Claire joined him at the edge of the ballroom, Emma asleep in her arms. This feels like a dream, Claire said. Andrew smiled. It's real, and it's just the beginning. Months later, the Ashworth Grand was thriving. Guests from all over the country flocked to the hotel, drawn by its history and charm. Andrew and Claire, now co-owners, worked side by side to ensure its success. Emma became the unofficial ambassador of the Ashworth, her cheerful presence a favorite among guests. In the quiet moments, Andrew often found himself in the library, reading through his grandfather's journals. One passage stood out to him. The Ashworth is not just a building. It is a testament to what people can achieve when they believe in something greater than themselves. Looking around at the vibrant, bustling hotel, Andrew knew the Ashworth's legacy was secure, and so was his own.